Okay, great. Well, thank you, Jose. And I have to say, everyone has been so incredibly hospitable since I came here. I really feel welcomed, and I thank Jose. I thank also Milagros, who's also been really helpful to me. And I was really excited, actually, to talk about this because I think when I heard what the topic was that you were focusing on with these lectures, I thought, well, interior design is so much about details, and I'll get further into that in a minute. So this was, it really allowed me to think about some of my work in a little bit of a different way. Oops, why is this not? There we go. There seems like a little bit of a lag. I wanted to talk about a few things. One, I wanted to talk about scale and creativity and some ground rules for the way that I think about what I do. And then I was going to show some examples of work to talk about how some of that stuff actually comes to being. Because one of the things that I guess you heard from what Jose was saying is that I'm very much a practitioner. I'm in the trenches with my clients. I have to be practical, but at the same time, I'm a designer, and I think you're all here because you love design, and you think that that's something that is really important, and that is the same for me. I've always been interested in the idea of innovation and creativity, and there have been a lot of books written about this. There's a lot of discussion about it. And why the design process is a creative process. And one of my favorite books is a book called by Thomas Kuhn called The Nature of Scientific Revolutions. And I think there's so many similarities between the way people approach being creative in the arts and in the sciences, and that I don't think there's really a distinction. And the way that scientists think about creating things and being innovative is very similar to the way that we do. They design a solution to a problem. We design a solution to a problem. We create a structure that is the solution to this problem, and that structure then will drive all of our decisions. You can call that structure the big idea, you can call it a party, you can call it any number of things. Some people call it a narrative, but it is something that you come up with that solves this problem that then becomes the framework for everything that you do. And the way that we do that is by creating form, and that form, people experience that form. They experience it, they get meaning from it, and if it is beautiful, and if it is well designed, and if it is has all of the things that Vitruvius talked about, then it also creates emotion. And I think when a design is successful, it is an experience for people that has an emotional quotient to it. One of the things that I was really excited about when I visited here, and Jose was kind enough to introduce me to a lot of you, and I came and looked at your studios, was to see that you actually are working together, various disciplines, because one of the things that all of these books on creativity and innovation talk about is how collaboration is very much integral to being innovative, that it takes many different points of view. It is an iterative process that is a collaborative process. And it was really interesting to me to see that you're mixing together architecture, interior design, landscape architecture, graphic design, and urban design, and having people work together on projects. I think the differences in the disciplines are also interesting, and they're really a difference in scale. And the pictures that I have up here are, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Charles and Ray Eames' Powers of 10. It's a short film they did in the 50s, and it's also one of my favorite things. It starts out with a photograph of a couple on a picnic on a lawn, and then it goes out it's a certain distance away from them, and it then zooms out 10 times that distance, and then zooms out again 10 times that distance. So if you look at the photograph on there of the couple on the lawn, if you go to the left and then up on the top, that's the zooming out part. And if you go in the other direction, it's the zooming in part, because then after they do that, they zoom in. And I think, to me, for instance, architecture is at this scale, for the most part. It's looking at things in a slightly different way than, say, interior design or urban design, which is at the power of 10 beyond architecture scale, or graphic design, which is at an even smaller scale than interior design. And so you see that there's a couple on the lawn, you see they're on a blanket, you see certain things about them. But I think interior design is really actually at this scale, where you're looking at that blanket and you're looking at the material that it's made out of. You're looking at what they're eating, you can see the book they're reading. And it's even at this scale, which is that you're sitting on the chair, you're touching the fabric, you're in the lighting, you are totally immersed in this environment. So, this is not to say that architects don't do interior design, because I am an architect, and that interior designers sometimes don't do architecture. But it's just, when I talk about interior design, I'm talking about that scale of things that I just mentioned. So, given that, and given the way I think about creativity, there are certain key ingredients, I think, that are prerequisites that I'm not going to talk about too much today, because that's not really the topic here, but these are pieces of what I do that are integral to it, and that are always a piece of how I think about what I'm doing. And the first one is kind of obvious, and that's sustainability. And you all are, I'm sure, familiar with some of the things that are built into designing sustainably, using less energy, using less water, recycling materials, less construction waste, recycling things, using more daylight so that you use less energy, all kinds of things like that make a design more sustainable. And I also assume that most of you are familiar with LEED, which is leadership in, I always get it wrong, but leadership in energy and environmental design, which is a rating system for how sustainable projects are. It's a documentation system where you, as you're designing, you then go ahead and talk about, you document that you're building in certain sustainable aspects of the project. And most of the projects that I'm going to show you are LEED projects, not all of them, but a lot of them are at least LEED Gold, and there's one LEED Platinum. One of the things I love about Perkins & Will is that there's a strong emphasis on sustainability and a strong emphasis on designing for health, which is kind of what I'm going to talk about a little bit next, which beyond the traditional things that we think about for sustainability, we also talk about designing for health and using healthy materials and using non-gassing materials. We have an open source resource on our website that lists toxic materials that are commonly found in building products with alternates and to use. And our library, our material library, is scrubbed of those products. We grill all of the vendors when they come through and ask them for material sheets, because there's tons of greenwashing. We ask them for the actual manufacturer's material sheets that show what's in the products, so that we don't include them in our projects. But there are other aspects to designing for health that I'll also touch on briefly. One of them is the fact that today, it used to be that infectious diseases were what most people died of. At this point, though, it's mostly chronic diseases like heart disease, diabetes, most of which are connected to obesity, which is connected to lack of activity. I'm just going to show you a couple of slides, and I've got, this is in 1989, what the United States looked like, and most of the country was at around 10% of people who were obese. There were some states who were up at 10 to 14%. And this is in 2009, which is the last time I have this slide. I have actually every year through then, and you just watch every year it getting worse and worse. So you can see there's a whole bunch of new colors in here. And most of the United States is now at 25 to 29% obese. And there are some states that are actually more than 30% obese. So what does that have to do with design? Well, there are things we can do to design so that we encourage people to be more active, and that is there are a lot of principles that people have developed. There's a lot of research around how to do this. There's also a lot of research showing that when you're working either at school or at an office, that your work affects your health in that stress can affect you, but also your health affects how productive you are. And there's been a lot of research around this as well. So all these contributed to the New York Department of Health and the New York City Department of Design and Construction coming up with a set of guidelines for designing. And this is also free and on the web, and you can find this on newyorkcity.gov. And finally, there's also been a lot of research around the fact that people do better if they have access to daylight and access to views. And so this is also something that's important to think about when designing, especially when designing interiors. So take all that stuff and put it in a box and shake it up. And so what has this got to do with designing and details and that sort of thing? I'm going to show a few projects. I'm going to show two series of projects that we've done for clients where we've done multiple locations for them, for the same client. The first one is for a media company, and they're very paranoid about using their name, so I won't, but you'll probably be able to guess it after a while. And we've done projects for them all over internationally. They're small. They're usually anywhere from about 3,000 to, at the biggest one is about 25,000 square feet. But they all have similar programs. So the first one that we did was in Ireland. And this one, we were just starting to think about what is it about each place that makes it special, and how should this office space reflect that space. And so given the same program, given the fact that most interiors is your 8'6" or 9' high ceiling, given the fact that the configuration of most office space is similar, how is each one unique? And I think this first one, we started thinking a little bit about using local materials. The stone and the tile are all local. But this one, I think, is a little bit, it's not, we kind of hadn't really put our heads around what about this company was unique, and also what about these spaces would be unique in each different place. So the next one we did was in Mumbai, and actually this one, we really started to think about what is it about Mumbai that's special, and there was so much that was special. There was so much unique quality to the context that this office space was going to be in, and there was this riot of color, this wonderful kind of metallic use of metallics, and so how do we put that into a space? And so here you see the same kind of reception area, the same kind of free food area that you always see in these But it's very different. Now, there are pieces of it that are very similar because they use a lot of the same, they work the same way no matter what country they're in. But there's a very different attitude that we had here about how the materials were put together and what they were. And there's a kind of a profusion of color in a very different way than there was, for instance, in Ireland, which was much more neutral tone with just one kind of pop of color occasionally. And a lot more reflectivity, a lot more kind of, it was a very different kind of an approach. The next one was in Frankfurt, and this one actually, we were thinking about Germany, we were thinking about German engineering, we were thinking about precision, and so the whole space is very, very finely engineered, and all of the shapes of things and the lighting is kind of supporting that idea. It's a lot more restrained than the one in Mumbai. But again, you can see that there are some similarities because we're dealing with basically the same program pieces. So it's really just in the details of how we execute them in the materials that we're using and the lighting that we're thinking about how to make this different. And in this one, we had a stair, and this stair actually was really fun for us to design. And the stair became like a focal point for the design and was very kind of almost like a piece of sculpture in the space. The next one we did was in Beijing, and again, very different environment. The Chinese had a very strong color theme that was going where red and gold are both considered very lucky. A lot of feng shui that we were thinking about, and also so the kind of rounded shapes. I don't have photographs of this one really. These are renderings, but it did actually get built like this. Some of these we couldn't get in after they were built. But the other thing about China that was wonderful was there was a great opportunity for craft because construction costs are really inexpensive there. That labor is inexpensive, so we could have all these handmade shapes that we could get made for and still be practical. I know some of you went to Brazil for one of your to Sao Paulo for your studio, and it's funny because one of these actually was in Brazil and in Sao Paulo, and we were really inspired by Roberto Burle Marx, and the kind of wonderful early modern or mid-century modern kind of shapes that he used. We were also, there's tons of beautiful modern architecture in Brazil, and there's something about it. It's the curves are very different and very unique. And Brasilia is an incredible place. And so we started thinking about how would we think about this space. And it's in an office building with a fairly unusual shape. But you can see that we were starting to think in plan about introducing some of these curves and thinking about introducing some of the color palette also that we saw in some of those things that I just showed you. And so with the photographs on this also, we kind of lose control of them somehow, but so the photographs aren't the best, but you can see here how, again, just a reception area, but this is very different from any of the other ones that we've done. And the curves are in the floor and the ceiling, and how we think about designing the reception desk. In every piece of this, we were trying to really use that framework to express what we thought was unique about this particular place. And again, on this one, we had a stair to work with, and the stair also became an expression of that kind of flowing, form-making And you can see also the terrazzo flooring and some of the conference rooms and the ceiling. And then here just what the office space looks like. And again, you see that the actual workstation is very similar to all the other spaces, but the actual office is designed differently and feels different. Again, some similarities, and there you can see one of the conference rooms is named Niemeyer. And then the last one I'm going to talk about is in Sydney, and I think some of you also went to Australia, so it's kind of funny. But this one, you know, Australia is a beautiful, beautiful place, and there's so much connection to nature, particularly in Sydney. The weather is wonderful. People are outside a lot, and we also were fortunate in that this one was in the top of an absolutely stunning building by some German architects called Ingehoven. And the building itself is LEED Platinum, and actually this interiors project is the highest rated platinum project in Australia. It was in the world, but then somebody got a higher score than we did, so we had a short moment of fame. We really started thinking about this, and the building has not a single straight line in it, or very few. So how do you put offices, workstations, how do you put all that practical stuff in there? So it was a challenge, but it was definitely fun to do. And actually the shape in the middle that's empty is this wonderful atrium right in the middle of this. So the plan is like a donut almost around that atrium. And this is the reflective ceiling plan. And I'm just going to show you a little bit of process here. So we started thinking about renderings and what that might look like. And we thought, you know, this is on the top of this beautiful building. The terrace has actually trees on it. Wouldn't it be great if, you know, that whole relationship between indoor-outdoor then got carried through into this space, so that you were in the trees when you were outside and you're in the trees when you're inside. So you can see how in some of these, how the curves also translate into the actual design here. And then this is what it actually ended up looking like. And again, so the idea was that, you know, you're in this forest, and that it sort of shows up everywhere. The floor, here in this case, the tile is actually kind of a irregular pattern, and the lighting, the trees are everywhere, and at the same time, we were keeping everything pretty open, so that you could see outside from almost anywhere in the space. And actually the monitors at the end actually go back into the credenza. They sink back in, so that most of the time there's no blocking the window. You can just look through the conference rooms right out to the beautiful view. And again, we were lucky enough to have a stair. And to me, those are so much fun to play with. And the trees are growing up through the stair, and there's like a big there's all kinds of foliage at the top, and one of the conference rooms with a curved screen. And then here you can see the relationship inside-outside, and you can see the carpet also continues that kind of dappled pattern of trees. And then here you're outside on the beautiful terrace, and even the seating, the casual seating, is like little pebbles. We were thinking everything was like a kind of something that you'd find outside. And these are just some close-ups of how we detailed some of the way the trees would, the trunks of the trees would actually perforate through the ceiling, and how the light fixture actually looks almost like leaves. The next set of projects is for another client that we've had for a long time. And some of you may be familiar with the furniture company Hayworth, and we do a lot of their showrooms in various locations. And so we have a similar mission with them, which is that how do we express that location when we have the same program basically wherever we are. These also are small projects, they're not large. They range in size from about 5,000 square feet to about 25,000 also. So here you can see the basic components. So there's a reception area, which is the white area at the front with the kind of a place where people can gather, a conference room, and then at the back there's an open area where they show a lot of their workplace products, their workstations, and some small offices. And then on the side there's some larger offices. And this is Houston. Houston is a fairly conservative community, so they wanted to have a lot of offices in this. They wanted a lot of wood because that wood, people in Houston like wood in their offices. So all those things came into play. But the greatest thing about this is, if you look in this, there are these columns all around the outside of the space. This space was on the ground floor, and right outside those columns, which had floor-to-ceiling 12-foot-high windows, were all these beautiful live oaks. So we just thought, well, that is so much about Houston, are those live oaks. They're everywhere in Houston, and if you've been to Houston, they just are the most beautiful trees. And so we just decided to continue the live oaks all through the inside. And there is a little bit of a relationship between this one and the other one that I just showed you. And you can see the ceiling design is designed around that. The wall has a laser cut pattern on it that we had custom made. And again, we tried to make this, they're so transparent so that you can see right through the conference room to the trees at the back. And even where they display some of their product, we put it so that it was actually facing out the outdoors, and you could see right through it to the outdoors, again, to those beautiful trees. And conversely, when you're outside, and of course in Houston you're driving and you're outside, when you're driving by at night, you see right into the showroom also. So it works in both directions. And one thing I didn't talk about is that on most of these we work with our brand people to develop environmental graphics, the signage. So here you can see some more views of that. And then the next one is in Boston. This one was quite small, but this one is a little more conservative even than Houston. This one we actually did before Houston. And you can see it has a lot of the similar elements, but it's a little bit more buttoned up in a way. And then this one actually is one we just finished in New York. And about 8 years ago, Eva Maddox, also from Perkins & Will, did this space. And at that point, Hayworth was trying to establish a strong uniform brand. So they were using like a lot of white everywhere. But that was starting to look old, so it was like, how do we refresh this showroom and bring it to really look like something that's about New York? So this is the entry you can see, and in this case we worked with the brand people from Hayworth very closely in developing some of the things that you see. But again, with these things, it's a lot of it is about the furniture, the details. And with the showroom, it's like, how do you make something that looks like an environment that doesn't just look like a furniture store? So it is about creating these vignettes that look like either a place that I work or a place that's my house. And so how do you create those kinds of things? With the New York showroom, one of the things that we had to work with, which was wonderful, was this very beautiful space that looks right out opposite Grand Central Station. So we opened out the view, and so you're just looking out at that beautiful view all the time. And what you're seeing, that big screen in the front, is actually some interactive technology that Hayworth developed. So we put that kind of front and center. And then that central space becomes almost like a town center like the town green or whatever, and then there's the kind of this little village that's around it that has a lower ceiling and that is at a much smaller scale. But inside that space, there's a lot of social activity that happens. So there's a cafe space and small places to sit and meet inside that large double height space. And some of this, like in these showrooms, you want people to feel like also they do sell some residential furniture. They want people to feel like this could be my house. So it's how could you make this feel like a New York apartment? How can you do that? So it's with accessories, it's with, you know, putting things that you touch, you know, where people are going to be experiencing them, such as the, you know, the kind of texture of the rug, the accessories that we would choose, and, you know, can this look like an apartment? Is there artwork? How do you make it feel like it's not just a furniture store, which it really is? So we would choose and work with Haworth to choose things to accessorize this that would make this look like a New York City apartment, or some place that some people might sit in their den to watch TV. And this last one that on this series is one that we're working on right now. And this one is in LA, and on this one we also did some brand rework with them. So we did some brand strategy with them because we had done that with Eva Maddox, and so we revisited it to try to go back to some of the principles of branding. And so again, this is kind of a multidisciplinary approach, and that's why I'm talking about it a little bit here. And this shows the location of this showroom, which is up at the top of this building in downtown LA. And we spent time thinking about LA, talking to people in our LA office. What is it about LA that we find to be really exciting? And one of the things that we really loved about LA was all of the wonderful case study houses, and the fact that it's an indoor-outdoor culture, but that beautiful modernism that really came to flower in LA. It's very sleek, very rectilinear, very different than, for instance, what we were doing in Sao Paulo. The other thing is we were looking at graphics of around that same time, and looking at the color palette that we were seeing in a lot of those graphics. And then layered onto that was this an interesting location because it's in downtown LA. If any of you know LA, downtown is still very gritty. There's a lot of homeless people there. It's coming up, it's being gentrified, but it's very edgy. And so this building was actually right on the edge of that neighborhood. And there's a lot of graffiti, there's a lot of creativity, there's a lot of art in the street. So again, you can see the plan is very similar on a lot of these. It has a lot of the same elements. But we started thinking about the enclosed space, each one as being one of those little houses. So if you look at the reflective ceiling, for instance, each one of them has like a roof that extends right out from the inside space to the outside space. And so the lighting will reinforce that whole idea. The color palette that we came up with, again, it refers back to some of those graphics. And then our brand people started looking at, if you look at the lower row on here, there's a pattern, and that pattern is actually a branding pattern that Haworth developed in the 50s that they still use. They call it their tangram, and it's very branded for them. But our brand people then took that and morphed it. And they morphed it in various ways depending on some of the neighborhoods that surrounded where this actual location was. And so here you can see that they picked out 4 of them that really seemed to resonate. And then the other thing that we did was we started looking at local craft to accessorize some of this and really think about how can we make this place really feel like LA by using local artists and local craftsmen for the accessories that we would include. And then layering all those kinds of graphics in the space, you can see some of the things that we work with them to create that are found in the space. And we even had this idea, because it is kind of an edgy neighborhood, that we would do this art installation of legs from all the Hayworth chairs and hang it in the ceiling, but that never went anywhere, unfortunately. But you can see that this kind of idea about the edginess kind of layered over even things like the distraction banding, which is on glass. Sometimes you put a pattern on it right around at eye level so people don't walk into it. We even made that consistent with this whole theme. And one of the rugs has this custom design on it that's also a takeoff on this. And this one is under construction, but these are some renderings. I think the renderings are kind of limited in a way, but you can kind of get an idea in the space of how some of this would actually look. What I will say about them is that the renderings the spaces don't really transfer to you a lot of the actual feeling of the way these spaces are going to be experienced, because you don't get the lighting, you don't get the little details of the accessories, you don't feel what the materials feel like. I think it's always interesting to actually see the construction and see the difference. So all of those actually were also designed as LEED Gold projects. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time here. This is a project that actually was one of the most fun projects I ever worked on. I have to say it's not sustainable, and I have no idea if it uses any horrible materials, because what happened with this one is it's an adaptive reuse in Seoul, and it's in this building, which is the tallest building in Seoul. It was built in the early 80s, and it's in the base of this building. There's a convention center wedding hall. And weddings in Korea are really, really important. They are huge. They'll have 800 people at a wedding, and that's not unusual. And this is what the space looked like when we first saw it. It hadn't been changed since the early 80s when it was built, and it was in dire need of renovation. And the client said, nobody wants to come here to get married. And we said, well, would you want to get married there? I mean, it was awful. So they said, well, we want something that's an experience. We want something that is themed, but we don't want it to be hokey. So we thought, well, how can we do that? And we came up with a number of different ideas. But again, the idea of tying it into kind of nature was actually one of the things that really they found appealing. And again, this is in a way that's similar to some of these others. There's a lot of references to natural, to nature and to the out of doors. The space has this central atrium, and they wanted to use the space outside the atrium, right next to the escalators, and they wanted to screen it off somehow. So that became a great excuse for us to come up to design these custom screens that open around the atrium. And those screens then actually became kind of a motif that we used at the entry that I showed you before, so that even when you got dropped off, you'd know that the whole space had been renovated. And here you can see a photograph of that. And here's the entrance, and then that was a rendering. And I'm showing you some of the renderings so you can see some process of how we communicate what we do with clients. Another rendering of the screens in the open position. And for those screens, we actually built a mock-up of one, which is on the left. You can see the actual screen on the right. And put a small LED in the bottom, just similar to what was going to be in the actual installation. And here you can see the screens in the open position. and then here you can see them on the side of the escalators. That brings up something else. As you can see, when you come up in the escalators, you were looking at a blank wall. So we thought, okay, what can we do with that blank wall that would be fun? And we came up with this idea that it would be a wall that would have flowers in it, and the flowers would be in glass tubes. So we were going to, so we said, well, we can, they can change seasonally. You could have like spring flowers in spring, and you could have fall things in the fall. And the client was like, that's great, but I'm looking at this, and there's like 6,000 more, thousands of these. How am I going to, keep track of these, keep them fresh, whatever. So we said, okay, we'll do silk flowers. But then we had to figure out how we were going to get this number of silk flowers made. So we had the client actually helped us find them in China and import them from China because, as I said, labor is cheap in China, and so they could get them inexpensively. And so they don't change, they just stay there. And I don't want to be the one that has to dust this, but so then once you get out of the public spaces, we started looking at, I'm sorry, that went too fast. We started looking at some of the rooms that are functioning rooms, and one of the rooms that I showed you had this little, baldacchino thing where people would sit, and that was a room where they had a separate room like that for the bride and one for the groom, and that's where they would sit and wait before the actual ceremony with some of their relatives. Then they sit separately. So we said, okay, the groom, he can sit in the forest. He's in the woods. Okay, so that's the forest room is for the groom. So this is what the ceiling looks like, and then this is what the room looked like. And here one of the things that happened with this project was that we designed it, we went through DD, and then the client just took it and built it. We didn't do the CDs. So we had no idea about what was going to happen with this. And it was amazing to me that it came out so similar to what we had intended. But there were some funny things. So the furniture, we had spec'd furniture, but they actually, someone there just picked similar furniture. So the furniture, I actually kind of like it because it's a little odd. But it's not what we chose, but it's interesting. And then even for the bathrooms, there's these special bathrooms. So this was supposed to be like a Starry Night, and so this is the bathroom. And that public bathroom that I showed you before that I went through very quickly, this was the rendering of what that was going to look like. And we thought water on the ceiling rather than on the floor, and that's what actually got built. So they actually did all this. And then my favorite room was where the bride waits. And we thought, where should the bride be waiting? The bride is waiting in heaven. So the bride waits in the cloud room. So here are some elevations. We did spend time thinking about how we could actually make a cloud. And so this is the rendering. And I want you to look at this woman because this was our imagination of what this was going to look like. And then, there we go. There's the actual ceiling. And the photographer, we did send a photographer, and we did get to photograph this, so we did control the photographs. But the photographer said, I was so lucky because when I got there, there was this wedding going on, and there was a woman there was a bride in the cloud room. And that's the picture of her. And we looked at this and said, how did that happen? Because she looks exactly like the one in the rendering. It was really uncanny. So I'm kind of running out of time here. I have a few more projects. I don't know if people want to ask questions or how you usually do this, but I'm happy to, I can either show another project or we can do questions or whatever you'd prefer. I don't know what's the usual. Okay. All right. Well, I'll do one more. Actually, this is actually a much more serious project. So, and this one's very different too, because this is about a business school, so it's very business-like. And this was this is a Philip Johnson building that was also built in the, I think, late 70s. And this was what it looked like when we started. And someone had the bright idea of putting all of the undergraduate classrooms underneath that plaza that you're looking at. So it was this very dark, and here you can see the plan of the actual building with the plaza in front, and then you can see all the classrooms underneath. So our challenge was twofold. One was, how do we make this space into a light-filled, exciting, vibrant place for students? How do we create like a heart for this school, because there wasn't really one? And then also, how do we make it so it's really both welcoming to the community and also a place that is really about New York? It doesn't look like a school anywhere else. So again, on this one, we worked with our brand people, and there was a loggia in the front. I don't know if you noticed, but we pushed the lobby out. And this was actually a design competition that we won. And this diagram was a drawing from the design competition. We pushed the lobby out and filled in the loggia so that you could actually you could see into the lobby, and then we also got all the natural light into the lobby itself. And then we cut a big hole in the lobby going down all 3 levels to bring natural light all the way down. We also added walkable skylights at the front of the plaza. We couldn't really put skylights in the classrooms, but you'll see how these walkable skylights come into the corridor at the back, so that you're always looking at natural light no matter what corridor you're in. And here, this is a photograph. Again, you can see in the lower left what it used to look like, and this shows the new entrance that's pushed out to the perimeter of the building, and how actually you can see inside, and you can really see what's going on in that school, and it really is much more welcoming to the community. And you can also see the walkable skylights. Here's a photograph you can see a photograph of what the lobby used to look like, and there were stairs at the far corners of the lobby that you couldn't really tell were there. So we also, again, to make the students more active and to have them use the stairs, we actually put this big stair in the middle. And we worked with our branding people, and I have to say, I toured the space before the branding stuff was put in, and the branding stuff just brought it to life. I think, having the environmental graphics, having the signage, just really gave it another level of design complexity that really brought the space into a certain kind of life. And here you can see this is the bottom level of that atrium, looking all the way up, and you can see also that the signage and the design of the signage is integral to this. It's really important. This is that back corridor, and you can see what that corridor used to look like. And then you can see the skylights above. And actually, if you see on the right-hand side of that corridor, there's glass. That is actually a slot that goes all the way down to the corridor below, so that there's natural light coming all the way down to the lower level. And I think I'll leave a minute or two, but I think I'm going to end here because I have more, but I think we've had enough.